Hello, everybody. I'm Chris Ronayne with University Circle Incorporated. We're glad to welcome you back to our second in the series, Mobility in the Modern Era. If you were with us in our first round, we enjoyed having you, and we're glad that you're back. We hope we're going to have an hour of really robust content and conversation today focused. I am going to, in a minute, introduce my colleague Annie Pease, but for the moment I am bring you into our presentation about, first of all, what we're doing in University Circle. So welcome back. This is the second of a four-part series, and we are glad you're with us today here in August to talk transportation innovation. So here we'll get started, and I've got a person helping me here, and thank you for that. The schedule looks like this. We've got, if you were with us on pedestrian safety, it was great to have our local Angie Schmidt, author of, the newest book out on the street that she came out of Streets blog, and she's got a great new book out on the street that you're going to want to read. Kim Lucas is with us today, City of Pittsburgh, and we'll have Will Burns from Spin in our upcoming shared mobility series. This is a schedule change, September 23rd, as opposed to September 29th. The reason being that we are hosting the presidential debate here in Greater University Circle at the Health Education Campus. So we moved up a week to make room for the presidential debate. And then rounding out our series will be Cleve Ricksecker, our friend down at Capitol Crossroads in Columbus. So again, glad you're here today, and let's talk a little bit more about what we're up to in University Circle. Those of you who know us locally know that this is a spectacular square mile of activity. It's a high density place, but really when we've built out a place that doesn't require always four wheels, we're loving a place where you can find your way around on your feet and on other mobility means. And our whole goal really is to build out a place that really connects. So transportation is extremely important to us here in University Circle, but we want to know what others are thinking. So we go back to our resident thinker. This is a bit harkening back to our last conversation, where the thinker right outside the Cleveland Museum of Art, a legacy gift of Auguste Rodin, brings forth a great thought leader in our neighborhood right at the Cleveland Museum of Art. Thinking a little bit about transportation today and how it transforms our lives. We're hoping that that would get discussed at the debate at the Health Education Campus here in University Circle when the debate comes to us September 29th. But we won't hold our breath that transportation will be top of mind, although it should be one of the things that vastly affects the lives of American residents and citizens throughout the globe. When you think about the desired future, which is it? Is it more of this movement out, more congestion in sprawling megapolitans around the country? Or could it be more of what we're encountering in University Circle in our partner city innovation districts, where we're more multimodal, we're walkable, and where we think we're building complete communities? Obviously, we're showing our hand that we're about walkable communities. A history of transportation transformation starts right here in University Circle for us. The actual name of our neighborhood gets its name from a trolley stop. When Cleveland City Council in 1902 named us University Circle, truly a trolley stop. And you can see at the very early beginnings, we were the circle at the university where the trolley stopped, hence our name. But you can see the different modes of transportation in that left postcard when you still had horse and carriage alongside streetcars in our early formation of this neighborhood. And as we take a walk through history down Euclid Avenue, this is 1905 at what was then Doan's Corner. In fact, 105 was Doan until the city decided to rename streets by numbers in 1906. But look at the street. It was a pretty shared environment here on Euclid Avenue, right around the corner from the west side of University Circle. And if you keep looking in the early part of the 20th century, the shared street to the left, if you look closely at that photo of 1910 right at Doan's Corners, you'll see, again, a cyclist, you'll see automobiles to the side, you'll see a streetcar coming through, and pedestrians all throughout. It seemed like a pretty shared environment in that cartway, all the way through to the 40s, when again, we had this dual modes of streetcars and walkers, obviously, and automobiles. And then we all know what happened. 1954, we sold our last streetcar, and we'll go to the next slide that shows really where we ended up. We sold those streetcars, those great trolleys, to Toronto, who went on to build a fantastic transit-oriented community, and we've regretted it ever since. So this is what happens when you go to a single dominant mode of transportation. And Euclid Avenue, the great American street, we've said it's the rise and the fall. We hope the rise again of a great American street. But it began to slip, and street life slipped when it was an auto-dominated street by 1970. Again, the loss of those streetcars and that shared street left us with this. And really, frankly, property, pedestrianism, the lack of people on the street walking, it really shows when we surrendered the street to the single occupant vehicle. So it also left us with the legacy of vacuousness, lifeless spaces where we prioritized parking the automobile maybe over the urban fabric that we once had. And it left us with legacies like this property affectionately once known as the beach, a parking lot, and once in a while students would sun themselves out there or play volleyball, but not much was happening between the institutions in the early 2000s. And that wasn't that long ago, 14 years ago, until we saw transit make an advance. And maybe this is the rise again of a great American street. The Euclid BRT arrived in 2008. And what happened curbside from it ever since has been phenomenal. We've seen $9 billion of investment from Public Square through University Circle. And what's happened off the curbs really got started because transit anchored it. Transit-oriented community, not just a single transit-oriented development. So now you see that same photo of 2006 here, 12 years later in 2018, and now 14 years later in 2020. And how are we getting around in University Circle today? Well, by many different modes. So transportation both transforms the fabric of communities, it responds to the fabric of communities, and the ridership modes change with the times. Higher density places, leaving us with less parking, more multimodal vehicles, more ways to get around, people to people, place to place in a high density innovation district like the Circle. So that's a little bit about us in our geography. And now I want to turn this part of the presentation over to my partner, Annie Pease, our transportation director here in University Circle, who manages the UGO program. Is going to tell you a little bit more about what we're doing in the specific transportation field today. Annie.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Pease, and as Chris mentioned, I'm the transportation director here at UCI. I'm really looking forward to the presentation by our guest speaker today. And before introducing her, I have a few slides to share about University Circle's transportation work as it relates to today's topic. Our expert speaker today is Kim Lucas from the City of Pittsburgh, and she's going to share information about innovation in transportation at various levels. And at UCI, our transportation work, whoops. Sorry about that. There we go. And here at UCI, our transportation work is really rooted in this fact that individuals' choice about how they get from A to B is driven by this combination of things available to them. The services and options for how they get from A to B, the information they have about all of those options available to them, and the infrastructure, how comfortable or safe someone feels making different types of trips. And in a district with so much going on the ground, we've developed our vision for the future of transportation through a district-wide 3-part transportation and mobility plan called Moving Greater University Circle. This was developed between 2014 and 2016 with input from public and private stakeholders. Through the planning process, we developed our vision for transportation in University Circle that's an accessible, sustainable, and vibrant neighborhood with transportation, and again, really rooted in the user experience there, any individual's ability to get from A to B, being a key part of all those things, accessibility, sustainability, and vibrancy. The plan made recommendations for coordinated parking, safe streets improvements, and organization at the staff and institutional level to coordinate sharing information and services across institutional boundaries. The implementation of this plan began in 2016, and I want to highlight a couple ways that tech has helped us advance our vision, new technologies. One area where technology has helped us significantly is parking. I mentioned our study focused on coordinated parking. This image on the left is a picture of a parking meter in 1940. The actual parking meter was actually invented in 1935, first installed in Oklahoma City. And amazingly, this technology has been very consistent over time. The image on the right is a parking meter today. Parking technology has not changed very drastically until recently. And in 2018, alongside CASE, UCI installed the option to pay by phone through Park Mobile in parking facilities across the district. So in over a dozen parking facilities, we added this new form of payment. It's not just payment, but it's also better information about parking locations and prices at different times. The ability to pay by phone also allows you to set notifications on your phone so that you can have a heads up about when your meter is about to expire, 5 or 10 minutes before. This reduces that experience of realizing your meter is about to expire and having to run back to your vehicle and your car. You can extend your time, not leave your meeting early, not stop your lunch early or your experience at a museum, and simply add time by extending your duration on your phone. UCI, we launched Park Mobile in 2018, and in the first year of implementation, we had over 9,000 individuals use Park Mobile just in UCI-owned parking facilities, and lots where users had a choice between Park Mobile and another form of payment. In that first year, about 30% of users chose to use Park Mobile. In the second year, that number jumped to above 50%, and lots where people had a choice. And now over half of the revenue that UCI brings in our parking facilities that offer Park Mobile actually comes through Park Mobile and the mobile payment option. So the adoption isn't always quick, but in just 2 years of this new technology, we've seen quite a quick adoption of this new form of payment for parking. Additionally, where tech has provided some assistance to us is in our CircleLink Shuttle service. UCI has a free public shuttle. Both the Blue Link and the Green Link routes compose the CircleLink. Moving Grid University Circle implementation began in 2016. And at that time, we made some changes to our route to better serve people traveling across the district, our operating hours, and additionally, with a shuttle service that runs every 30 minutes, we recognize the importance of reliable, consistent, real-time information. And we upgraded our real-time info to translock and real-time shuttle tracking. So now users wanting to use the shuttles have 3 different options for real-time information. Our website, yougointhecircle.com/shuttle, has a live shuttle tracking map with all of the shuttle routes. In University Circle, live dots that show exactly in real time where those shuttles are. That's good if you're at a computer, but if you're not, the app, if you're on the go and you're out walking around in the district looking for a shuttle, you'd want to use the Translock Rider app, which has the same map, but accessible in an app form. You can plan your trips or ask the app to send you a notification when the shuttle is about to arrive so that you get better information about when it's coming. And we've also integrated our real-time information for the shuttles into the transit app, which is RTA, our public transit agency's real-time app for public transportation vehicles. This is really helpful as it allows people to do multimodal trips. So connect to your destination. You can take the Health Line or jump on the Red Line and use the shuttle to connect to your next destination, all through using the same app. And the introduction, the real-time information upgrade came alongside some other routes and operational improvements to the shuttle. But again, we launched the real-time information in late 2017, Q4 of 2017. And this chart shows the ridership on the CircleLink Shuttle by quarter for the last 3 years. So again, implementing the changes, adding better information about when the shuttle is coming, when it's arriving, being able to plan your trips and cross different types of transportation options, public transit with the shuttles. We've seen a huge uptick in ridership, which is a really good thing. And I end on this note from our work just to mention that at our scale, technology is really broad, but the importance of having a plan and a vision for what transportation should look like in the future, from our perspective, is paramount. And on that note, I'm really excited to turn the presentation over to our guest, Kim Lucas. Kim Lucas is the Assistant Director in Pittsburgh's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, where she oversees the department's planning, policy, and permitting teams. Prior to this role, Kim worked for Washington, D.C.'s Department of Transportation in the Planning and Sustainability Division. In that role, Kim led a team responsible for overseeing the planning and implementation of shared micromobility, freight and urban delivery, and transportation demand management programs. Kim has over 15 years of professional transportation experience, beginning with her stint, and I love this, as a student bus driver at the University of Virginia, and has worked in the cornerstones of transportation planning, the public and private sectors, advocacy, and research. So with no further ado, Kim, I'll turn this over to you. If you'd like to start sharing your screen and pop up your presentation.
Yes, thank you for that warm introduction. Let's see if I'm doing this right. You guys can see my presentation?
Yes, Kim, we can.
We can.
Wonderful. It's always awkward to just kind of like present into the ether. So let me know if at any time my connection drops or something like that. So yes, thank you for having me today. I'm really excited to share a few notes from the city of Pittsburgh with you. We're going to talk, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about our department, the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, which is one of the newest for the city of Pittsburgh. I'm going to talk about our department's efforts planning for the future, the distant future. We are working on a 2070 vision plan right now. And then we have a few minutes at the end for questions. So the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, affectionately referred to as DOMI by those in the know. We were established in 2017, and we are a department that combines functions that were previously held in the Department of Public Works and the Department of City Planning, as well as new functions that previously did not exist within the city. Our goal, or really the definition of mobility and why we are the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure and not a Department of Transportation, is that we really believe in the bigger impacts that mobility has on someone's life. More than getting from point A to point B physically, we truly understand that mobility can help people socially, economically, etc. Our department's mission is to provide that physical mobility that is necessary to support the social and economic mobility of the people of Pittsburgh. And we do this through the management, design, improvement, and operation of the public right-of-way. Our goals, and I know this may be a little hard to read, but our number one goal is that we believe that nobody should be seriously injured or killed using our roadways, regardless of what mode of travel they choose to take. Our second goal has to do with accessibility. We believe it's a right for every resident in the city of Pittsburgh to get to fresh fruits and vegetables within 20 minutes travel time of their home. Even if they're taking public transportation, that 20-minute travel time should include the waiting time for that mode of transportation. And we believe that every resident has this right without needing a private car. So we're really trying to enable that. We know we can't do that alone. We know that as the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, we don't build grocery stores necessarily. So we work closely with our partner agencies, such as the Department of City Planning, to make sure that those amenities are appropriately placed throughout our city. Our third goal has to do with short trips. We know that today about 40% of the trips that are 2 miles or less in distance are driven in our city. And I'm sure most of the people that are on this call right now know that when someone chooses to take their car, especially for super short trips, that contributes to an increase in congestion. It contributes to problems with air quality, which in turn is a public health issue, and ultimately is an issue of space as well when it comes to where that car gets stored at the beginning and end of those trips. And so one of our goals is to make sure that for very short trips, especially those less than 1 mile, are easy and enjoyable to achieve by non-vehicle travel. So that means making biking, walking, and public transportation the preferred modes to get around. Our fourth goal has to do with affordability. We hope that no household in our city would have to spend more than 45% of their income, regardless of what their income level is, on the combination of housing, energy, and transportation. We're the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. We can't control housing costs or energy costs, but what we can do is make sure that affordable modes of transportation are available and accessible, and that we can keep them as affordable as possible through great planning and through great partnership with our local transit agency and other groups. And finally, the City of Pittsburgh is a city that is one that is inclusive and diverse, and we want our city streets to reflect the pride that we have in our city. So this is a little bit of the nuts and bolts of how our department is arranged. So there are 3 major bureaus. You heard that I am the bureau chief for the Planning, Policy, and Permitting Bureau. So within my shop, we've got transportation planning. That means general neighborhood type mobility plans, as well as specific modal plans like bicycle and pedestrian planning work. Policy, so we are bringing new forms of mobility to our city, and we are working on something called the Pittsburgh Mobility Collective that hopes to, once they're street legal in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, hopes to bring fleets of electric scooters to our streets to improve mobility and connectivity of our community. And permitting. Our city issues at least 30,000 public space permits per year for work done in our right-of-way, and that is something that my bureau does as well. The other 2 bureaus are project design and delivery, which basically means the large-scale capital projects. So the reconstruction of bridges, landslide mitigation, which in Pittsburgh we have a lot of, thanks to climate change and other issues. We are doing and having to deal with a lot of environmental impacts like landslides and sinkholes. And step reconstructions and those sorts of projects. And finally, the Traffic Bureau, which has to do with all of our roadway operations. So whether that is pavement markings or signage and signals, they're the ones who are controlling what's basically happening above the surface. So just to give a little more contextual information about the City of Pittsburgh, we are a city of bridges. There are 150 city-owned bridges throughout our city. 500 retaining walls. You heard me mention landslides and environmental challenges. Well, imagine a city that's got 500 retaining walls already and that many bridges. You can imagine the scale of some of those environmental concerns we're experiencing. And 800 sets of city steps. I'll talk a little more later about our city having walking in its DNA, and those steps are part of what has enabled that. So, the 2070 Vision Plan. The City of Pittsburgh has a population, as you can see on the slide, of about 300,000 people. Looking at this data, you can tell that we're about half the number of residents that we once were. What we're planning for with this 2070 long-range vision plan is not necessarily a return to our full scale of 700,000, but asking the question, what would our city look like and what do we want it to look like if we were to regain just half of the people that we lost? So if we were to bump up to about 450,000 residents, what changes would we need to see to make sure that they had the mobility they needed? What we've done is we've taken a look at where we were, with a city that was once 700,000 residents. We had planning efforts back then that were anticipating even more growth beyond that scale. And so there's a lot of great work that was already done to accommodate a city of a bigger size. And we wanted to lean on that work because our city's older, our streets, they're there. A lot of our development has happened. And so we want to make sure that we're taking the lessons from the past and not forgetting them and using them as we move forward. This is another picture of the city of Pittsburgh historically, and some ideas that had come out from those historic planning projects that just maybe didn't come to fruition, with the loss of the residents, with the loss of the jobs that resulted in the loss of population. There were a lot of big ideas that just had to go away for a little while. So this is not a planning effort that's starting from scratch. We're looking at old plans and we're tying together the plans that we have today. This is just showing a few examples of the different scales of plans that we're tying together. We've got neighborhood scale master plans. The Esplanade photo that you see on the top right is a new development proposal that we've seen in the city. We've got a number of small area mobility plans, and this document, this 2070 vision plan, is bringing together a lot of that work into one place. So I mentioned that there are a lot of plans, and I wanted to talk a little bit about where our planning effort fits into the grander scheme. So we're right in the middle. We are a city that is within a county that is served by a regional, not a regional, but a county Port Authority of Allegheny County Transit Service that is within a region within a commonwealth. So the scale of what we're doing is connecting both to those regional plans and even beyond, and incorporating the plans from the individual neighborhoods, individual developments, individual mobility looks into something that can fit into that bigger context. The way we are doing this with our 2070 vision plan, which we've started drafting and we hope to finish up within the next couple of months, is by looking at a few different scales. The city of Pittsburgh is a city that's a part of a world, and we want to talk about how we're able to connect our residents and our commerce to the greater economy worldwide. And then we take it down. We start big and we go all the way through the different scales down to street, because we know that decisions need to be made on all of those levels in order to be successful. This is a map that was generated by the Port Authority of Allegheny County. This is an equity map. We realize that as we undergo these planning processes, that not all communities are starting on an equal footing today with regards to the access to economic mobility, with access to resources such as vehicles or transit, and access to educational opportunities. And so as we are approaching all of our planning efforts, and especially this long range one, we realize that different communities are going to require different considerations. So how will this plan be used? This is not a document that's choosing winners in terms of technology. Instead, what this plan is doing is saying that, you know what, we know that there are going to be new transportation modes that are going to come online in the next 5, 10, 50 years. We want to think about where those modes should be and what sort of supportive changes need to happen to connect to those modes. So this is a guiding document to help us make decisions on new technologies and new plans as they come online, as opposed to specifically prescribing exactly what our city will look like over the next 50 years. So the first scale is connecting to the world. As you can see here, Pittsburgh's future growth and prosperity relies on connections to other markets for both people and goods. Today, the Pittsburgh International Airport is outside of our city limits, and we don't really have a great high-speed connection between the airport and downtown. Choosing to look at a plan with a 50-year scale means that we can say, is that the right place for an airport to be? If it is the right place, as opposed to moving it closer to downtown, what are the great modes of transit that we can implement between now and the next few decades to make that a seamless connection between the airport and our residents and our visitors to the city? As I mentioned, this plan is agnostic on technology. We don't know if we're going to be connected to the world through a hyperloop, through vertical takeoff aircraft, which my understanding is very close on the horizon, a lot closer than a lot of us maybe fully realized, or through something like high-speed rail, which does already exist in a lot of places. We're not sure what that technology, what the right technology is going to be, but we're pretty sure that whatever it is, there's going to be one opportunity within the city to place it. And so this plan is taking a look at what sort of supportive decisions need to be made so that that mode is correctly placed and well connected. The next scale has to do with connecting the region. While we've got 300,000 people within the city of Pittsburgh, Some people come into the city on a daily basis to work, and some people leave the city on a daily basis in order to access jobs in the suburbs. And so we want to make sure that workers and goods are well connected to those opportunities that aren't just within the city, but also outside. What this might look like so that it doesn't look like just a ton of more cars on the highway or more cars on all of our city streets are park and ride or park and bike opportunities. We already have a few places where you can drive your car closer to the city and then pop immediately onto a riverfront trail and bike the rest of your way. This might look at an increase in transit corridors or maybe even congestion pricing to help manage our roadways. The idea is that this is for folks that are close enough to drive, probably too far to bike their whole trip or to walk their whole trip, and how can we make it efficient and so that we can really limit the number of individual cars, especially single occupancy vehicles, that would be on our streets within our downtown and other employment centers. The next scale that we went down to is connecting centers. So I mentioned that we are looking at increasing to 150,000 more residents, which would also hopefully come with more jobs and places that they need to live. So how can we connect these opportunities without having those residents rely on their cars? Gondolas are something that, you know, a lot of people on this call might chuckle when they see a picture of a gondola, and I might have been one of those people a few years ago, but having been fortunate enough to go to Japan last year and actually taking a couple of these gondolas, I've seen how they can really work in a transportation setting and more than just a novelty. And so it's not off the table. Maybe some of these connections of centers looks like a ferry, you know, increased water taxi service. And of course, public transit and biking and walking, making sure that those modes are safe and attractive and connected. These were some of the questions that we wanted to find out when we were taking this presentation to the public. Not only are these the right modes, but are we identifying the right centers? You know, we're not necessarily, like I said, saying that this is exactly where a gondola would go versus this is where we'd have a new busway. It's more about, are these the right places that we anticipate people being? And if so, then in the future, we know that we need to connect them. Smaller than centers, we go to the district scale. So this is the idea that within those large centers, there might be multiple districts or multiple neighborhoods that are close enough that together they form a district. These might be places that on a really sunny and 79-degree day, you might want to walk that 30 or 40 minutes between them, but typically they're a little far to walk. And so the types of modes that we would think about connecting those districts would be what you see here. So we've got examples of electric scooters, which we are actively trying to bring to the city as soon as they are legalized at the state level. Potentially a series of autonomous small shuttles. Of course, any sort of small vehicle right now has a little bit of a concern with regards to COVID and health safety, which has really thrown some complications into our planning efforts. But the idea is that we want to make sure that whatever mode someone might need based on their own mobile and abilities and preferences, that we are making the connections happen for them. And finally, the street level. So when you start big and you are thinking on the scale of, okay, we need one node in our city where a Hyperloop or, you know, some other sort of mode of transportation would land within our city. And we know that that's going to need to be supported and connected through transit, maybe have bike connections, maybe have a parking lot, that sort of thing. But a lot of this really gets down to how the street looks. While we have a lot of streetscapes that don't have a lot of space, you know, we are an old city and we have a lot of narrow roadways, we still want to think about, from a design perspective, what makes the most sense in that space. With COVID in the last few months, we've seen a lot of change. We have been very nimble in changing the way our public space is managed and sort of divvied up so that we can support business operations. In some districts, we've expanded sidewalk cafe seating. We've enabled the curbside lane to be closed for cafe seating or pedestrian movements. In a few places, we've even shut down entire roadways so that businesses have a safer space to operate. Similarly, we have slow streets, which was is the opportunity for residents to request that their street get closed to through traffic through signage so that there's more space to bike and walk safely. So managing streets means making sure that you are making your streets accessible and safe and comfortable for all users. It has to do with the comfort of those streets, so lighting and trees. We are a 1% for art city, so public art is something that is also in our core and really important to us. And so identifying the funding for it and making it happen is really important. And then also data. I heard earlier Annie mentioned that your area in University Circle has Park Mobile that you launched somewhat recently. You guys use the transit app. We have those apps in our city as well. And so even from the non-physical sense, these technological improvements that are connecting us not only within our city, but to your city as well, are what has really changed the face of transportation and will help us make decisions with regards to street level design. And finally, managing change. So all of this is change. Best laid plans will sit on a shelf if you don't have a component to them that has to do with getting people on board with the vision you have. And so the way that we've tried to achieve this is through public outreach, which of course with COVID, we're all sitting on a computer right now. We're not out in a public space together. But by having engaging materials, which you'll see here, we had a live sort of cartoonist that was documenting our meetings, having a website available where folks at their leisure can submit comments and write on our maps, and just trying to be as accessible as possible is how we are hoping to get the groundswell of supporters for this vision and to contribute to this vision for success of it. And with that, I am happy to take questions.
Well, thank you, Kim, for that wonderful overview of what's happening in Pittsburgh. And when time and COVID post-pandemic permits, we want to get out and see your work live. Grateful for your presentation. We have about 25 minutes of questions, and I'm going to ask that you guys enter them into the chat, and we're going to ask a couple of opening questions. But really impressive what's going on in Pittsburgh. And I want to jump off right into that direction. Question is, it seems that Pittsburgh has been a go-to for some R&D innovation, some sort of test pilots, if you will, years back, Uber AV, and knowing that it seems that Pittsburgh's been a magnet for sort of innovation, experimentation by folks in the transportation industry. Is that leadership at a public level? Is it the institutions, your higher education institutions that are driving that? What's driving the go-to city, a mighty mid-sized legacy, dare I say, Rust Belt and the Water Belt city here? What do you think is attracting the innovation that's happening in Pittsburgh?
I think it's all of that. I think it's having leadership that is receptive to being a place for experimentation. It is having the academic institutions like Carnegie Mellon that have kept our economy going when we lost other types of jobs and that are themselves on the forefront of robotics development. We do have a number of AV companies that are testing today, not only to test passenger vehicles, but we also have Starship Technologies, which has been piloting their food delivery robots, autonomous vehicles in our city. And we are actively working with them. We have a policy analyst in my shop who is there to work with the AV companies to make sure that there's public engagement and understanding and feedback to help shape those programs. And also in times like COVID, to find new use cases. Now that we're in a moment where person-to-person interaction is more challenging, there's even more of a reason to have perhaps a delivery robot bringing you something like medicine or food, even more necessary for some folks than it was before. And so I think the leadership for sure, and then also just being very receptive in general to the needs of those companies and the needs of the public and acting as a liaison between the two of them.
I loved a couple of your slides in terms of their outward looking, the regionalism that you seem to have in play here, both at Matryoshka Dell and sort of governments working with one another up toward a regional perspective, and even your outreach, which reached Cleveland here We used to joke that we're one region, call it Cleveburg because we couldn't call it Pittsburgh. We're really one, one sort of knowledge shed, if you will. And I like that you're really reaching that far in your planning work. Want to talk about your plan, ambitious 2070. For a lot of planners here, I do want to thank, by the way, APA Cleveland, one of our sponsors, and Hugo and UCI, but a lot of planners from Cleveland and elsewhere here, and transportation planners on the line, and engineers. 2070 seems out there. We've, you look back, we're 100 years, I guess, in your stretch goal at 2070 from the 1970s energy crisis. You're 200 years from, the advent of the streetcar invented right here in Cleveland. But 50 years out, I'm going to go to Kessa Trumbull, who, just to paraphrase, she said, you're an example in a mid-sized city with population shrinkages. We've had too, where you've shown that you can innovate, and that even in sort of unpredictable times, you're stretching out with a 50-year plan. But she asked, how do you balance, and dare we even say defend, a 50-year plan? You mentioned a little bit about it's not about picking winners and losers, it's about the framework. So just to elaborate a little on that. It is an ambitious, we haven't heard 2070 in a while.
Definitely. And I have I'm sure my director, Karina Ricks, many of you have probably met her or know her, who's a visionary. I'm sure that long range plans is definitely within her wheelhouse. So one of the things that makes it less daunting to think in that long range is that this is not, like I said, picking winners or losers. This is not saying we're putting all our bets on this technology and this is exactly everything prescribed for the next 5 decades. It's instead offering an opportunity before we get, those opportunities really brought to us, to think strategically. All right, what are the things that need to be considered from a land use perspective? How connected, if we want growth, where are those people going to go, and how can we accommodate what might come our way in the next few years? And setting out a policy document to help make those decisions if we're not personally here. It's not the only planning effort that's going on. So we've got, as a department, much smaller scale plans. We just issued our first Bike Plus plan in 20 years. So the city's first and last bike plan prior was in 1999, and it was a 10-year plan. So we just in June put out a 10-year plan, our Bike Plus master plan, that's got 120 miles of new bike facilities on street and 27 miles of trails proposed. We have a pedestrian safety action plan. The county is currently working on their long-range transit plan, which is a 25-year plan for them. And so it's not that we said, oh, we're just going to look 50 years in the future and not worry about right now. We're kind of trying to do it at multiple different scales, and each of those different scales has a different level of detail and minutia that comes with it.
I think a lot of people are, in addition to being intrigued by this plan, and kudos to you and your director and your whole department for stretching out and really thinking big and thinking long term. There's some interest here on the chat about the evolution of DAMI as a city department. What were the motivations, whether internal or external? And I mean, I'm intrigued just by the name, Department of Public Works. It's really innovative. Let's just use our theme of the day. But tell us a little bit about the advent of the department, if you can, and how you came to be.
So my understanding, having not been here prior to the last year actually, is that there was just a need that was recognized by our leadership, our city leadership, our mayor's office, that there were transportation operations that were happening, street paving, snow removal, some construction work in our Department of Public Works, and there was planning efforts that were happening in our Department of City Planning. But without them being under the same roof, there was probably kind of a loss of efficiency and a lack of synergy. And so this was an attempt to get together planning, transportation planning, and the actual engineers that are designing, constructing, and eventually maintaining a lot of these assets under one roof, so that we could collaborate a lot better, so that we would come together to make decisions that would affect citywide, as opposed to just looking directly at our one sort of lane of what we're responsible for. So my director Karina Ricks was brought in to start the department a number of years ago. As I mentioned, it brought together positions, literally the human beings and their titles came over from those other two departments into this brand new department. And it added some new positions so that we could expand our efforts and look at things like new mobility and AV technology through a blend of local resources, typical operating capital budget, city budget stuff, but also through a number of grants and philanthropic opportunities is how we were able initially to staff up, and especially with those brand new positions.
We had a question from the field here that wants to get down to the details. To the extent we can, I don't know if you have the FTE count, but they're asking about people in Downey and of the composition of staff, generally how many planners, how many engineers, and I think this is a great question. I know our Cleveland teams think about this because it's one thing to plan on one hand and implement it on the other if the two aren't working together, which I think is the nature of your advent of your department. But there's a question about the split of planners and others.
We are a very, very lean department. So in my bureau, I have 10 direct reports that comprise the planning and policy staff. So we've got 4 people who I think have planner in their name and a few people with policy in their name, and then some right-of-way senior managers. Within the permitting office, we've got substantially more human beings because they're issuing 30,000 plus permits a year. They're out there inspecting those permits and utility work. And so there's just more bodies. From the engineering perspective, overall, DOMI has less than 100 staff. So, and unfortunately, looks like one of my slides was missing that had the street miles. We have somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 lane miles that we pave and maintain.
Wow.
I think, and nobody quote me on this, but the City of Pittsburgh has around 56-ish square miles, and Washington, D.C., where I previously worked for the last 6.5 years, had in the low to mid 60s square miles. So geographically, similar scale. The Department of Transportation in D.C. had 1,100 staff compared to DOMI's less than 100.
Wow. We'll have to do a comparative audit in Cleveland. We're about 77 square miles, and we'll have to, as we add up the different department staff, because they're not all under one roof, have to compare with you. Wanted to get into, first of all, you're getting a lot of props for you and your colleagues for thinking big, this outside of the box idea about how to put a department like this together and integrate core functions. I'm sure, guess you got supportive leadership at all levels. We had Mayor Peduto out to the City Club a couple of years ago to speak about in his pride in the city. So it's nice to see this coming together. What people want to ask, we're getting in the chat, is some of the first action steps of the 27 division plan. And, if you can cite some first wins or the low hanging fruit that you've been able to pick.
So, one of the things one of my homeworks that I had from the pre-call was to find out if we had put any sort of metrics in the plan yet, and we haven't yet. The plan is still in development. Okay. So I think from a certain level, the first action step is just making sure people know about the plan and that it's incorporated into other efforts. As I mentioned, the Port Authority of Allegheny County, which provides our transit service, is undergoing their long-range transportation plan. So making sure that our ideas and our findings are incorporated into efforts like that and into the city's comprehensive plan, where they have already said, the City Department of City Planning said, we will basically just take what you've already written down and plop it into the comprehensive plan. Right. Those are our first wins. I don't want to overstate, and I'm sure they'll do some massaging, and they do have a mobility stakeholder group, but they don't want to reinvent the wheel, and they don't want to rewrite the plan. And so
I love it when egos are relaxed and progress is made. And again, everybody has their own front yard and backyard views of this in their own hometowns, but when you look out and you see city and county really working together on planning and not duplicating, it's a nice thing. And I'm intrigued, since you said you're still in an infant stage and just beginning to socialize the plan, and it seems a very first critical step to make sure there's an engagement and there's an embracing that the plan exists. But we had a question about how the goals themselves came together and what that process of enlisting input for those goals. Really great. I mean, I just reciting from what I saw, essentially you were far out on the Vision Zero plan with a desire, and it need be everybody's, for no fatalities on your streets. The access to fresh foods idea that it need not happen from driving, that within a mile people should use and have the right for other modes. It seemed like you were moving toward location efficiency and energy, housing, and transportation not being more than 45% of income. All of these do reflect the value of a community, and it's really impressive, your values that are driving those. How did you get to those goals, though, vis-a-vis the public engagement process?
That's a great question. So that I don't have a great answer for. Those goals are our overall department goals. So they definitely predate the vision planning effort. And so my belief and understanding is that when Karina was brought in to start the department and learn more about some of the needs from the city leadership about what they hoped that this would become, from her experience working with the Department of Transportation and working with city leadership here, I think realizing that mobility is so much more. I wish I had the quote in here. It was from, I think it was a Harvard study that basically said, had a huge percentage of someone's ability for economic attainment is based on transportation and their access to it. And so I think that's the core, is that we know that beyond just counting how many cars you can move through an intersection, that access to good, healthy, clean, robust transportation options can change lives. And so our goals are reflecting that.
We're channeling your goals in University Circle. We've gone beyond complete streets to complete community with the same idea that within a 20-minute walk, you can get everything in your daily needs, access to great healthcare, transit, parks, schools, and fresh food. And it's a work in progress, but it's a goal, and I'm going to have to continue to compare notes with you. You know, there's just pull just a Churchill, and he said once that we shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. We shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. I think you could say the same for our transportation infrastructure. We shape it and thereafter it shapes us. So I'm glad to see your goals aligning with, you know, really the core of human need and connection. I wanted to ask you about your last couple of slides about managing the street. In some places, it would take a culture shock within departments, and it really frankly is right now with COVID, as restaurateurs and commercial outfits and public health experts are saying, let's fan out further into the right-of-way for pedestrians for safe social distance, but enter the culture shock at, you know, you need X feet of width in cartway for an automobile. How are you guys handling this dynamic of bringing together people beyond the curb into the street, presumably from your slides, and how's it going? We're seeing other cities in fits and starts, our own included, but how's it going in terms of that, you know, curbside management and the culture changes that have to happen to make it happen? Presuming you need to do that in Pittsburgh, change culture.
Well, fundamentally, you know, our COVID Streets response is about helping our city survive this unprecedented challenge. And we know that if businesses can't survive, then nobody's going to have cars, and they're not going to need to park or drive through a certain neighborhood because there's nowhere for them to go and they have no money to put gas in their car. And so we have taken the approach as a city of like, just fundamentally, what can we do to make sure that economic base succeeds? In some places, it's been much smoother because there was a business district and business improvement district in place, and there were already, you know, natural locations where when you close the street, there were lots of other redundant routes, and it wasn't really going to have a negative impact on mobility at all. And in other places, we've had residents that said, hey, I have an Airbnb I operate across the street, and this bar is already rowdy enough, this restaurant bar. If you let them operate in the street, I'm not going to be able to rent my apartment to people. And so we've definitely had to bring these people together, literally meeting on site with the elected representative, the, you know, business owner who's applied to take over the street, the Airbnb owner who has concerns about that, and just have a dialogue about it and try to say, okay, how can we meet in the middle? You know, and for that specific example, we said, all right, we think we can approve this, and we have approved it, but in respect to your neighbors, here's a few extra requirements we're going to put on you to make sure that you're operating with all of the COVID compliance requirements in being met, and, you know, to make sure that you have the right spacing and that you're not overcrowding. And then trying to leverage our inspectors and public safety to just make sure that when we have enabled this repurposing of public space, that it is being done in a way that was approved. So safely, still passably by people with mobility impairments and that sort of thing.
Sounds like a smart way to go. Business survival and human survival is the, high goals to work backwards from.
And sorry to cut you off, but one thing I forgot is that we started all of this with a task force.
Yeah.
So we quickly stood up a task force that brought together representatives from the
Great.
business community, from the residential communities, from the city, so that they could help shape the program.
That's terrific. And I applaud you for that. I mean, again, looking at it through an economic lens as well as health lens, and very good. We somewhat related question from one of our team members, Debbie Berry here. How supportive is Pittsburgh to closing lanes to cars? Obviously, we all know you need a needs assessment to do such a thing. Sometimes, not always. But where are you in relation to some of the things we've seen in maybe Jeanette's City Con's work in New York and with her supportive mayor back when? How does that go? And Pittsburgh and Cleveland are very similar in some respects. Came out of the steel making and auto world, and old habits are hard to break. At least here.
It can be a struggle. That's one of the hardest things about being a planner and being a transportation planner is the space that you have to work with is probably already claimed by somebody for some other use. And so everything you want to do is going to come with trade-offs and with change. And that makes it critical that you have those conversations with people first. And so for these short-term closures, I think they've been overwhelmingly successful. The businesses are supporting their local communities and people want to be able to go get a bite to eat or get takeout easier. And they understand that. And we make sure that we've got safeguards in place so that we're not closing the one street that would access your home. We're making sure from an engineering perspective that it's something that can be okay and still have the mobility and accessibility around it that it needs. But we are learning that, with our rapid implementation of our bike plan, we are a final mile city. There are some grant resources that were received by Pittsburgh nonprofits to help build out our bike plan quickly. So we're in the midst of that. It's super clear and super critical that the more outreach you do before you try to make those changes and the more you understand the needs of those communities, basic planning stuff is what is needed to get people to yes. And we're learning the hard way on some of our projects that we maybe moved a little too fast on, but at least for the COVID response, we've been pretty successful in what we're doing. And in part also is because it's the requests of the community. With slow streets, it's a resident raising their hand and saying, I want my residential street converted. It's not the city saying, your street looks best from our desk to be converted. And I think that helps too, because we insist that they talk to their neighbors first before coming to us.
Gotcha. I'm going to try to squeeze in at least 3 quick questions for you. None of them too easy, but an old friend, Howard Katz, who's tenured enough, I don't think you mind my outing him as the questionnaire on this, but he says, do you think having a smaller city council in Pittsburgh where each council person has responsibility for several different types of neighborhoods makes it easier for the mayor and your department to get buy-in on citywide goals? Are your legislators, I think relatively speaking, we're 11 more miles and we've probably got more council members, although I'll give them credit for helping us with the planning out the streets. How about you? How's your relationship with working through council, and does the size of it in count?
I haven't actually thought about how the size relates. We do, I guess it makes it easier for us to go to an individual council member, which we have for all of our bike projects, for example, and brief them first. If we had, a ton of them, it'd be a lot harder because there'd be that many more meetings. And so that makes it streamlined. One of the huge eye openers for coming from DC with, a population over 700,000 now, to a city that's less than half that size, but geographically about the same, is that I think that the elected representative to resident ratio is a lot different. And so when it comes to the community engagement part, that's why it's so critical, because they have the mayor's phone number and he will answer that call.
Yeah.
And so just working in this context means that the personal relationships and the individual citizens' concerns are heard a lot more frequently than they might be in a denser city.
Yes. This is a question from our former MPO at NOACA, Director Howard Mayer. Hello, Howard. And Howard asks, another Howard, how are you working with other metro areas on the development of a Hyperloop?
That's a great question that I don't totally know the answer to. We're kind of not I don't know how involved we are in the development of the Hyperloop beyond recognizing that we're going to probably need to accommodate something of that nature. So let's figure out where something like that would go. And then when the opportunity is a lot closer to us, participate in some of that decision making.
Well, count us in the Cleveburg region. I know our MPO, Nowak, is working quite a bit on it. And the other night, Howard Mayer is a former ball boy for the Cleveland Indians. Howard, I remember you telling me that story. But to go to the Pittsburgh Pirates Cleveland Indians game by Hyperloop is a stretch.
10 minutes, you'll be here.
we got other priorities, but it's nice to muse about. And we'll consider this a priority too. On the two final questions here. One, again, I think Howard Katz has some history in Pittsburgh neighborhoods and knows them well, Oakland, Squirrel Hill, downtown. He asked the question, realistically, how much do you think you can reduce congestion in crowded places? My corollary to that is that our goal? This is a complicated question right now when we have not come out of COVID pandemic. Are we trying to, increase density for the location efficiency? Are we trying to reduce other aspects of congestion, i.e. automobiles? It's a loaded question, but your thoughts on congestion management and the reality of reduction of congestion?
Ooh, I mean, if I had a magic wand and there was no possible repercussions, then Pittsburgh is well poised to manage congestion because we've got bridges and tunnels. And when you have bridges and tunnels, you have really easy gates that you could eventually monetize and maybe regulate through pricing of some sort.
Yeah.
I'm not proposing it. I'm not saying that I've been a part of any discussions about it, but just from like transportation planner, student hat, that's, we're in a position with rivers and other geographies that would make it easier than some other places to do. Like DC would be hard because we've got so many borders in the district that are just a million roads connect us to other places. From a policy perspective, we're just trying to make all modes that aren't driving by yourself more attractive and more accessible. And so that means making better bike facilities, that means making better walking facilities, that means looking at improving our curb cut process. And when someone wants to add a curb cut to their property, whether it's a single family residence and they want to just have a driveway, or it's a large development and they want it to access a lot of off-street parking, we're trying to use all the tools in our toolbox to make sure that our public space is designed in a way that's conducive to non-drivers having a safe and accessible and enjoyable way to get around.
Got it.
Yeah.
Your questioner there, he's lived in both cities, Pittsburgh and Cleveland, and he says Cleveland should be required to go to Pittsburgh to observe how they do things. So we are fulfilling in part the requirement today with you, Kim, but it really is impressive. Your goals, your work, your go-to Department of DOMI on transportation. So we did, and I'm really glad we did look to you today. The last question comes, I'll say it again from Debbie Berry, which is, who do you look to? Are there other cities that you look to for best management practices as you develop and implement your plans? To the extent you see best practices in other cities, tell us a little bit about where you've looked and what you see in best practice.
I mean, sometimes it varies a little bit based on exactly the mode or best practice you're looking to. Obviously, when it comes to equity and making sure that your services are super accessible, we look at the Bay Area, San Francisco, Oakland, California. Minneapolis has done a lot of progressive things from a transportation planning perspective. We look internationally, we look at Toronto, we're looking to Europe for some examples of COVID streets, for example, or micromobility. What's kind of interesting is being in the city of Pittsburgh is that it's also really important to look at cities like you guys are doing that might be similar in scale, similar in economic makeup, similar in history, so that we're not just looking at cities that are not at all like us. And so when it comes to our bike work, we're talking to Providence, Rhode Island right now, and New Orleans, because they're a similar scale, but they've also received the same type of grant funding that our partners receive to help implement a bike plan. So it really varies depending on if we're looking for someone who just really feels like us and is in the same kind of like financial situation as us, or if we're like, if we had a magic wand and we had, twice the money, what would we do with it? We look all over the place for whatever we can take.
Yeah. Well, I wish we had another hour because I would query you a lot more on exactly that, bikes and bike sharing. You have extensive experience there as well as your planning background. It's really been a pleasure. I want to thank you, Kim, Lucas, and congratulate you on all the work thus far, you and your colleagues, and best ahead in the work ahead. We will get to Pittsburgh to see you when the right conditions permit. I do want to thank again APA Cleveland, Hugo, and UCI for today's sponsorship. Really want to thank the more than 60 of you who zoomed in today to listen to Kim and for your questions. I hope you'll do it again, September 23rd. Remember, we bumped that up a week to accommodate the inflow of candidates who I hope talk about transportation when they meet September 29th in Cleveland. One lives in hope, to quote a former planning director, Norman Krumholtz. But we do hope that there's more discussion nationally about transportation. Come see us again. Sign up at universitycircle.org for our September 23rd third discussion on mobility in the modern era. We're going to talk about shared mobility. We're going to have a representative from SPIN, to which I'm looking at 3 scooters right outside our office from SPIN. So you'll have those soon in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Kim. Good luck. Thank you. And thanks to all who zoomed in today. Kim, really appreciate your time. And we'll see you next time, September 23rd, here for UCI's third presentation, Mobility in the Modern Era. Take care. Stay well.